Okay, looks like we're good now, everybody. Sorry about that.
Okay. You'll tell us
Grace, whenever you're ready. Yep, whenever you're ready, Grace.
Okay. Hello, and welcome to the Women Paving the Way Roundtable discussion. My name is Grace Kroniken, and my pronouns are she, her, and I will be your facilitator tonight. The Interstate Bridge Program, or IBR as we like to call it, and we're going to try and only use that one acronym, wanted to put on this roundtable event to start a dialogue and a conversation around equity for women in the workforce. Today, we have an amazing panel of women that have gathered here to discuss the topic of women in infrastructure. Before I introduce the panel, I would like to introduce our fearless leader, Program Administrator, Greg Johnson. Greg?
Thank you, Grace. It is my pleasure to be here to make some introductory remarks for this panel. I think I've worked with just about each of you on the screen, and this is just an impressive group of technical experts. And with this being Women's History Month, it is tremendously appropriate for us to have this roundtable to discuss the challenges that women face in the workforce in general, but more specifically in the engineering, construction, and architectural realm. This is a great challenge, and I am looking forward to the discussion. Our program is, as one of our pillars of the program is equity. So this is, once again, our hope that we can listen and learn from folks who are living this every day. So with that, I'm going to go off camera and listen to the great conversation. So thank you all
Greg.
for being here.
Thanks so much for being with us. Okay, we're going to get straight to the panel. I think we've got a lively group of folks here tonight, so let's get to it. Carly Francis is our first panelist. Carly is the Southwest Region Administrator for the Washington Department of Transportation. Previously, she worked in the Oregon Department of Transportation on the Volunteer Road Usage Charge Program. She is a planner, and she got started in transportation riding her bike to work in Baltimore and helping complete the Baltimore bike plan, the bike master plan. Our second panelist is Mara Krinkle. Mara is the IBR program's Principal Climate Officer, and she is a senior planner at Parametrics. She specializes in NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, and regulatory compliance for transportation and other infrastructure projects. Mara brings over 20 years of experience in the multidisciplinary analysis and collaboration related to the environment. Thank you for being here. She lives in Portland with her family and is a devoted biker. Our third panelist is Shilpa Malam. Shilpa has a background in transportation engineering. She has worked on multiple projects across the country, ranging from neighborhood traffic calming and safety projects to corridor studies and innovative intersection and interchange design projects. I wanted to highlight that Shilpa was recently featured in a DJC Oregon column titled Women Recommend You Read Her, titled Women in Transportation Engineering Should Question Their Doubters. I highly recommend that you read her column where she shares her life experiences through her lens as being a woman leader in transportation. Welcome, Shilpa. Our fourth panelist is Natalie Owen. Natalie is the IBR Deputy Civil Design Lead and Civil Engineering Project Manager at WSP. Natalie's career spanned highway engineering for multimodal street and intersection design with particular focus on bicycle and pedestrian facilities. She is passionate about improving the lives of local community members through accessibility, equitable engineering solutions for users of all ages and abilities. Our fifth panelist is Charla Skaggs. She is the IBR Strategic Government Relations Advisor in Washington and Vice President of WSP. She has been assisting public agencies on major transportation projects for more than 30 years. She is a seasoned government relations professional and focuses on engaging communities at the nexus of policy, legislative, environmental, and financial issues involved in building a more accessible and effective transportation system. Welcome, Charla. And our final panelist to introduce is Heather Wills. Heather is the IBR strategist and senior vice president at WSP. She is currently the program manager for the Oregon Department of Transportation toll projects, including analyzing a cutting-edge approach to employing congestion pricing in the region. She leads a team of over 30 multidisciplinary professionals who deliver transportation and financial analysis and all communications, outreach, and government relations for these projects. Outside of her work, Heather loves chasing her husband and son down mountains on bikes and snowboards. Welcome. Okay, we're going to begin with a question. Oh, I need to remind participants that we will be centering women's voices today with a short time that we have together. We will also be trying to get to the questions that some of you may have submitted via email. For participants in the Zoom room, please use the question and answer feature to submit your questions. If you look to the bottom of your screen, you should see it available. You may have to click the more button if you're joining via mobile device. We will now go to our first question of the night. This question goes to all of the panelists, and I'll probably take you in the order in which I read through your bios, but when did you realize you were a leader, as a leader of any kind? And let's start with Carly.
Well, you could have gone backwards, but that's okay. We can start here. So I guess for me, realizing, I think early on that I talked sometimes and people listened. And that's been kind of a common theme for me, even in school. I think it was harder for me to understand that I had leadership legs within transportation because I'm a planner, I'm not an engineer. And so understanding how to actually lead in that space has been more of a growth area, I think, of trying to figure out what that looks like. And I think both being able to understanding that sometimes when things are really funky, that I'm able to help think through those things with a group of people has been really valuable. And that's basically how I manage the region, is with my great team of people and using that as a collaborative tool. So that's, I would say, kind of, understanding that I don't always completely lose my mind when things are going crazy, and can help with a group of people work through stuff. That's usually been, my go-to. And then also knowing when the engineers actually start to listen, especially to a planner, that's always been a surprise moment to recognize that I must be maybe not doing something right necessarily, but at least you're kind of holding my own in the room with people who have a different background than I do.
So for people that are not in the profession, maybe I could ask our next speaker, Maura, to talk about the difference as well. I want you to answer the question, but if you can pull out the planner engineer side of things, because what was just mentioned by Carly is that being a planner in an engineering world, I think people might appreciate why that's an additional obstacle. Maura, you're on mute.
Okay, that's bingo. Somebody gets to be on mute when they try to talk.
All right.
I am also a planner in an engineering dominated world. So being a woman in a male dominated world and a planner in an engineering dominated world, kind of, it's a couple different angles where you come at things a little differently. And Carly, I love that. Like, oh, I talked and people listened. I think I'm going to pay attention for that kind of in my daily life. I think being both a planner and a woman allows, or I come with a different lens that I think is a little bit broader than a lot of our colleagues probably, and with a more collaborative approach. And I'm thinking so much on this program about our users of this infrastructure that we're trying to build, and just being more sensitive to kind of the less dominant parts of our society who would need to get around in our communities too. So from the cyclists to the parents to the working people hauling back and forth over this bridge and through our community. I just think having that different perspective is really valuable to bring to that space. And back to the question, I kind of thought, well, when I was asked to this panel, I guess, but then thinking back, like, right, for a long time, I've been president of my 4-H club. I was kind of raised in a place where you were expected to just jump in and take reins and be in the center of the room if you had the interest and abilities to do that. So I was really privileged and was able to kind of flex those skills early.
So one lesson to kind of put out there then is when you get the chance to jump in, take the reins and run with it.
Right. I mean,
to be
the world
perfect.
needs people who jump in, right? And you will mess up along the way and there will be people who help you and just keep going. So
Good lesson. Shilpa, welcome.
Thank you, Grace. So I thought this was a great question and I was thinking about it and like the logical thing, I went into the most logical thing I Googled, but no, in all seriousness, but I don't think it was one moment for me about being a leader. I feel like there are multiple small moments throughout my career. And I feel like there's still those moments that happen that are learning experiences for me. So in our profession, every project is different. Every time you lead a task or people, everybody's different. And being able to adjust that and seeing something through, I feel is one of the learning processes. I want to echo something that Mara said, is the importance of people like standing up and trying to do things. As when I became a project manager, it was the first time, it was maybe a few months. It was a new company, and I was going around to other offices to introduce myself. And there's one place, a young engineer out of school. She was South Asian. She was Indian. She came up to me. She probably met me 5 minutes before, and she said, "I'm really glad I met you because I was planning on changing my career focus because I've never seen another Indian woman be a project manager before." That was not something I thought before. And that was one of the moments where I guess I consciously thought being either a presence or trying to be more intentional about it. I think that was like lessons of when they say representation matters. I think that was a practical lesson that I got, that representation matters. I could have been a really bad manager. She had no idea if I was a good manager or not, just that it was possible for an Indian woman to be a manager. So there've been multiple small lessons, but that's something that stands out to me through my career.
Excellent. So being a role model and being and having representation out there for people to see, for other women to see, in your case, an Indian woman kept her in the field. That's excellent. We've heard about teamwork, role models. Let's move on to Natalie. Natalie, when did you know you were a leader?
Yeah, I think I share Shilpa's experience that it wasn't one particular moment. But if I had to pick one, I'd say I probably first realized I was a leader when I received my first request to be someone's mentor. While I always continue to be a mentee that's learning from women who came before me, it was a profound honor to be identified as someone, to learn from, as opposed to just be learning myself. I think in reality, I'd been a leader for a long time, back to groups in high school and captain of the cross country team and, through college, leading folks on my team in the work that I did. But I think this request was that moment, where I really recognized my own talents and that I did have something to contribute.
So someone asked of you, would you be my mentor? And that meant you were mentor material. You were,
right.
I'll say, above something. Yeah. So it's an externality that kind of made you aware. You saw yourself in the mirror a little differently. Great. Charla, how about you? When did you know you were going to be you were a leader?
Well, like a lot of the women here on the panel, it was a lot of different times or a lot of iterations. I want to say two things. One is, I don't think that I want to say I think that everyone has the potential to be a leader, and we just lead in very, very different ways. And the reason I say that is I have a personality that tends to be the one who sort of steps in, and Grace and I have worked together before. I just sort of take charge, and that's always been who I am. And so I think for me early on, when I saw this question, I had a very specific moment in college where I was like, oh, I'm in charge. They're looking to me to be in charge. But I also, the longer that I am in the professional world, the more that I really appreciate those who come at leadership from maybe a quieter space, or they're not as charismatic, or they don't talk to, I talk a lot. I have, you can see I'm very expressive. My major was communications. I mean, my name in Spanish actually means she chats. So I was born to this sort of thing, right? But I want to say, like, as women are looking to become leaders, to remember that there is leadership reflected in whatever type of personality or approach you bring to a situation. And so for me, that's when I knew. But I think there are other women who would likely say, oh, I knew when, someone came to me quietly to ask for advice or something. There's lots of different ways that we as women and we as leaders really show up in the world around us.
Thank you. Heather.
So as I was thinking about this question, I feel like somebody saw something early in my career and put me in this big management position. And I don't equate management with leadership. So I was in a position of authority, but I feel like leadership is more earned. So there was a lot of intentionality around becoming a better leader. I invested a lot of time and requested programs and training and things like that. But really it started with like this deep reflection of how I show up and how people perceive me in particular, and being honest with myself around that. I think that I was given the title manager. So like, in effect, I was considered a leader, but I didn't really think of myself as a leader until I was able to really like create something intentionally around that position, where I felt like I was mentoring and providing opportunities for staff, and just like creating something that was more than managing the scope, schedule, budget of the work.
So can you say a little bit more about what you did to train yourself to become a leader, or what kind of experiences you sought out to strengthen yourself as a leader?
Yeah, so there are amazing leadership programs. The one that really, I worked for the Oregon Department of Transportation for a while, and there was this year-long program that was the Ascent program, and it was all about like getting to know yourself and what your strengths are. And it wasn't about like it was more about like how people perceive you and what, like learning about yourself. And I just feel like there's a lot of programs like that you can search out. And I recently was just in the IBTTA, which is the International Tolling Organization. I was in their Leadership Academy, and it was very similar, like lots of the week-long intensive program to really think about different ways of showing up, really, and how to help others become the best they can be.
So,
yeah. There's so many programs. Yeah.
Well, so I think an important thing for a takeaway for someone watching this panel is those opportunities are out there. And if you find them and bring them forward, I think you're saying something similar to what Charlotte was saying, is whatever personality you have, you can be a leader. Anyone can be a leader. It takes, in some cases, a lot of practice or a different framework, or, some challenges, overcoming some challenges, but you have to figure out how to do that, and asking for help through a program. Several of you have mentioned finding a mentor we started, I think it was Carly that talked about teamwork. I think no one has really mentioned networking, but teamwork and networking and having people to help reflect for you from the lessons that are out there. Or if you have self-doubt, having a good, not just a buddy, but a network of people to kind of say, I'm thinking through this particular problem. How am I coming across? Or someone in a meeting that says, you came across a little strong there. Did you intend to? Give you a little feedback. Your program institutionally gives you some of that feedback when you run through what they offer in the training academies and that sort of thing. So I think we've also come up with the role model and the mentor I've mentioned already, and asking for help are also some lessons to take away. Okay, let's move on to the next question here. I'm going to ask Heather, Shilpa, and Mara this question. What is the biggest challenge, in your opinion, in getting more women involved in working in transportation? Heather.
I'll start. I'm off mute. I think that it's that people don't know about the opportunities in transportation. I feel like it's maybe perceived as being very engineering focused, but as you heard from this group of women, like we're planners and there's communications experts and there's engineers and there's all different kinds of opportunities in transportation. I just don't think that it's really well known. I mean, for me in particular, I graduated from college and got an internship, and I was placed at the Washington Department of Transportation as an intern. And I realized just how complex and how interesting and how fun transportation is and how much it affects every single person in a unique way. And I was gravitated toward it. And that's when I went back and got my master's degree in urban and regional planning, focusing on transportation and environment. So I just feel like it's not, I didn't know about it. I accidentally became a transportation professional.
Okay. I've heard that a lot before. Shilpa.
I think something similar to what Heather mentioned. Transportation projects, everything to do with transportation has a direct relationship to what happens out in the real world, in the society. So I feel the society thinking about engineering and STEM as not traditionally women's field also has an impact on how many women choose in STEM or transportation as an option. So I guess like along with being planners, engineers in transportation, we're also like part of a society. So that's also an opportunity for us to be present and in other parts of our life, saying that just like Heather said, it's not just engineering, it's like planning, there's communications, there's government relationship, there's so many things that make up a transportation project, a successful transportation project, and that impacts everybody. So I think it's opportunity that first it exists, and also that it has been traditionally male dominated, but it doesn't have to be. Times are changing, so I think we all have that, probably a little sense of need, that little sense of responsibility to make ourselves more visible and say that there is an opportunity here.
Shilpa, what made you become an engineer? Why was that inspiring to you? Or was it?
So engineering itself, to be honest, growing up in India, I had a lot of cousins who went to engineering school. I dealt with math. I loved math. I had no problems with it. So it was just more of a natural thing, me picking engineering to do my undergraduate. But that was like the extent. I didn't know after that if I was going to stick with civil engineering, if I was going to do transportation, but I was just going to college. But once I took my transportation classes in my junior year, that was something really clicked. And I said, this is something I'd want to do. This is something I can spend more time. If I were to do like master's, this is something I don't mind spending like more time to do this. And that was, and I'm glad it worked out. But once I started working, it was more than that. It was more than just like science and math. It was trying to fit science and math to what the community needs, who don't care when you say this is the design speed or this is what the design is. And that was more challenging. That was more of like a putting together a puzzle. And that's something I still enjoy doing.
So the puzzle part appealed to you.
Absolutely.
It's problem solving. I think that's what good
Definitely.
managers are, is problem solvers. Well, so you had exposure to engineering and you were attracted to it. Heather didn't know it existed and she got out and then had exposure to it after college and then had a master's degree to shape. Mara, what's your story?
Oh, so I came at it kind of from an environmentalist perspective.
Okay.
I was always really interested in the environment and recycling and riding my bike to every single job I've ever had. Kind of grew up that way, right? So I studied economics and botany in college and kind of found my way to the Department of Energy looking at alternative fueled vehicles as my first job out of college. And I was surrounded by a bunch of men, mostly white, not all. And it didn't occur to me that I was a woman in a man's field necessarily. I think because of my privilege and background, they kind of treated me as a daughter and that was easy. But then I was like, this transportation stuff's pretty cool. And this affects every aspect of our life. And it's just so important for how we live and engage in our communities. So I was kind of hooked. So then I went to graduate school and studied policy. And here I am 20 some years later doing this.
So you're kind of in between. You had some experience. You stuck with the environment. You're interested in the environment, which
Yeah.
we've seen in the program. You've done a really wonderful job bringing that to the program. You have, and then you saw more, and you like Heather reshaped your education a little bit to bolster it up. Is that
right? Yeah, I was like, I'm working with all these PhD guys at the Department of Energy, and I better go back to grad school, study some more. They were all economists, but I went with policy because it was a little more applied. So turned away from that a little bit, and got to deal with the words and the people and how things fit together. So it's been great. But I want to echo what Shilpa said about the representation, right? Like it's changing. It's changing slowly, but I think with STEM and people in school kind of learning about how math and science can be applied to ways that affect our communities probably will resonate with a wider swath of our population. So I think that's pretty exciting. And I feel a responsibility to kind of share that.
all of you have mentioned kind of a connection to the community in some way and trying to take your education and have it help people and help on the problem solving of the people involved. It's not just the hard math that's the attraction, it's its connection. A number of us on this call are members of the Women's Transportation Seminar, and it sounds like we need to go out and get to those maybe junior high and high school young ladies and let them see the kinds of jobs that we do so that they stay with their math and science and stick with the program. We just need to till it a little deeper there so that people like Heather are going to see the opportunities there before they get, into the college years. So, well, thank you very much. We'll move on to the next question. Really good answers. I appreciate that. Let's ask the next group, the other half of our group, about advice. What kind of advice would you give young women or women already in their career? Because there's a lot of years. Charlotte and I have been in this business a lot of years. What advice would you give women thinking about maybe coming into the industry, either as an engineer, through the finance, through the government relations? There's just a lot of areas. Transportation is a fascinating career. Natalie, let's start with you. What advice have you got for women out there or young girls?
Yeah, thank you. I would say that some advice I would give is to never be afraid to pivot. I think when I entered college, I wanted to be a computer science major because I liked building computers in high school. But once I started coding in college, I discovered that spending time in a dark computer lab at 3 o'clock in the morning just was not my thing. So I changed majors a couple of times in college. I also did a double major in both visual arts and structural engineering. And so once I graduated with my structural engineering degree in hand, I realized that I really did not like that either. I realized that once I started working in in engineering that I was given some opportunities to do active transportation work. And so I tried out civil engineering and it really clicked. So I would say just keep an open mind, always believe in your capabilities, and just don't be afraid to take a different road. Just be brave and walk down that other road and see what's down there. And it may just be the right thing for you.
Excellent. I think that advice to pivot is excellent advice, because what I found is life is very long, and having lots of different new places, either it really takes a lot of risk. We may have a chance to come back to that, but either change your employer or change your subject matter, stay with the same employer. There's just ways. Pivot doesn't mean you just drop everything and leave and have a new life. It means you just change slightly your path. And that's really excellent, and broaden it. I mean, again, life's long, so it's good to have some diversity of experience to bring to those jobs later in life. Thank you very much.
Absolutely,
Carly,
Grace.
wait, if we could start before you go on, Carly, I'd like to ask our interpreter, are we doing okay? Is the pace all right? Okay.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you for being there. You're really helping us. Carly.
So for me, I would just note, I think it's a little bit like Natalie's saying, but recognizing that there's a broad array of skill sets that are useful in this work. And so there's this heavy focus and this assumption that transportation is STEM, which it technically is, but also, and I say this with love and respect to engineers, sort of the spaces where engineering school leaves a lot to be desired for how projects get done and how you navigate them and how you, there are some engineers that I think are good at, and anybody who are good at hearing what people care about and taking that in and stewarding that in a process. And there are others who are not good at that. And it's so critical. I mean, to me, like, I think some of the ways I've been able to actually gain clout and respect and be legitimate in my space is to hear, really to listen to what folks are saying and take that on and try to carry that forward, and keep it safe for people in the process, so that you're not just, caring about the thing that you know about, but you're finding ways to care about other things. So just the space of just recognizing that an amalgam of skills is so important in the work. So I think that that's important. I do think, being able to pivot, I mean, the array of things, my schooling didn't hardly dovetail with this. And, I got here through, riding my bike to work and being in Baltimore where nobody rode their bicycle really to work. And so then they were like, why don't you want to work on the bike plan, because you're the only crazy who's driving, riding your bike to work. And I think there's spaces where the things that you care about show up in transportation, that and can be impactful. And to me, this is all really about the opportunity to help folks get to all of the things they want to do with their life. And so I just think there's a really broad connection. It's messy at times because transportation isn't easy, and it's I think, with a climate officer on this panel, there's a lot of interesting burden in the world around transportation. But it also really helps people, live their lives and meet their families and get to schooling and education and work and play. And so I just think it connects to a lot of things that is really, that's really valuable. So to me, it's recognizing there's so many different skill sets that are useful in this work, and figuring out how to carry water with everybody else in issues that you're trying to deal with.
So if I'll use the word nerd, not that would describe the previous speaker or yourself in any way, but if someone came out of school with a lot of great skills, a lot of great engineering skills, and they are math skills, and they maybe viewed themselves or their friends had given them some feedback that they were a little bit of a nerd and rather narrowly focused, what do you do to give them courage to get out of, because when you're out there, I've talked to some nerds in my life, and they see stuff going on, but they don't really know how to speak up and bring it to the table because they think their job is just straight ahead. So what do you do to get people to broaden their horizons, to bring into what they offer as a professional, to the discussion that's going on instead of just giving answers back and forth, yes and no. How do you broaden people out? You said it takes a broad array of skills. How do you develop those skills? If you start feeling very comfortable with math and science and you end as a regional manager having to do a lot of people and political skills, how do you make that transition?
Well, I'm probably still trying to figure it out. So there's that. And also I would say for me,
a very successful woman. So I want people to listen because you've done just that. I know.
And for me, for a survival skill set, for me, I think is actually the fact that I'm pretty analytical anyway. So I came at that in that space. But I think, the more that, I mean, it's such a basic concept, but in talking with engineers about how you communicate with folks, like how would you tell your kid about this? Or how would a kid or a family member feel about this? Sorry, that's my dog.
That's okay.
And I think that space of just like trying to think through, if you were just a person, or I sometimes think about, I used to get mailers for the big pipe project near my house, and I don't know anything about sewer stuff. And it would just kind of come through, and I'm like this. And I realized that the same way in which we try to engage people is the way in which I was engaged with that flyer. Cause I'm like, okay, great. You're going to be fine. And, kind of toss it out. So the space of like understanding that like the thing that we care about and we know about is a blip in other people's spaces. And so how do you work on making it, kind of like not to be negative or whatever, but like kind of children's book version of what we're talking about. How do you make it simple and accessible for folks? And so I think both that, like putting yourself in other people's shoes, and whatever tool works in that way. And then how do you make it like hyper accessible? And just like, what's the basic, and we see examples of this on IBR all the time with like the mayor talking about, popsicle sticks and pudding with respect to how the bridge is standing up, and like these things, which I cringe a little bit at because it makes me uncomfortable. But the space of just making things really simple in how you talk about them is so valuable and important.
I think we've all been at public hearings where we have the toothpicks and the marshmallows, and in order to keep the kids occupied, at least I've been in several, to keep the kids occupied while the parents are listening to a more technical version. If you orient a little bit closer to the toothpicks and marshmallows and how things fit together, that the kids are focused on, you can communicate a lot better with the parents than getting an engineer that hasn't done. You've suggested several things. Put yourself in other people's shoes. Get a broad array of skills out there. Then maybe the first time you go do this, you're not the best speaker. You can try it, but you've got someone else with you that is, and you're maybe more the technical expert, that sort of thing. Natalie, did you want to comment on that before we go to Charla?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add here is I was given a similar opportunity, Carly might remember, on the CRC version of the project. And it was one of those moments where I had never spoken in front of stakeholders. I had never gone up and promoted my design. And as this young engineer, given that opportunity, so that's the only thing I would really add is just give people the opportunity to do it. Ask them, people, the younger engineers that I'm working with, I try and bring them into client meetings. I try and bring them in and allow them that opportunity to feel that experience and to, be nervous and prepare and, to build that up in themselves. And I think there's like a lot of people will realize that they have the potential to do that. And it was just sort of hiding underneath the math nerds that we are, Grace.
So taking advantage of opportunities provided to you and giving opportunities as a mid-level person or even a project starting out in a project. Nobody's perfect at what they do the first time, whether it's, art or engineering or singing, that nobody's perfect. And so giving them the opportunity to practice and not expecting them to have to be the greatest in the world, but at least adequate, and help and give them feedback. And people need to know coming up that they need to ask for those opportunities. We also should provide them as best we can. Charlotte, you've had a lot of experience of that, and you're not an engineer or a planner. You've done a great job in the transportation industry with that communication piece and taking us nerds and trying to get out and speak. So give us your advice.
Well, thanks. I'm going to actually, I think it'll echo some of what others have said. I want to start with just saying in this moment, I've been really aware that many of us, including me, are talking about our college experience and what we studied in college. And I hope that there are some folks listening to this who are interested in transportation that have not had the opportunity for college, but are looking for ways to enter into our field. And so I want to say one of the things that I've loved about my experience in transportation is that there really isn't a set career path. You don't have to have a specific type of education or a specific series of jobs to find a really meaningful and engaging career in the transportation space. So that's one of the things that I've always liked about it. And yeah, I have most often been the liberal arts major who's right in the middle of all the engineers, right? And I think both Carly and Grace have heard me say at times, nobody ever hired me for my math skills. Like, that is just not what I bring to the table. So I would say the things, if somebody was interested particularly in communications, community engagement, or even more so government relations, which is what I do a lot of now, my advice to them would be, again, no set career path. In fact, a variety of experiences in your career can be really helpful. I started as an executive assistant. I still believe that was the best training I ever got for doing government relations, because it trained me to just be listening to things that didn't seem to matter at the time, but then turned out to matter a whole lot a little bit later. And also gave me an opportunity to learn things in a way that maybe were a little more accessible. So, for example, through a job I had as executive assistant to the director at the Port of Tacoma, I learned bond financing just from having to sit and listen to a lot of meetings about bond financing. And that comes in, I mean, if you're working on transportation projects, you got to know the money and you got to know bond financing. So I always sort of look back on that as this experience of who knew when I was sitting there all these years ago that would prove to be so valuable. The second thing that I would say about what the type of work that I do is you have to go into it realizing it's not glamorous, like in any way, shape, or form. It's a lot of grinding it out, having the same conversation again and again, particularly in the government relations or the policy field. It is just having to be comfortable with slowly seeing chaos come into order, because it takes a long time. And, I was thinking today, just recently, I've spent 6 months trying to get to an answer on something that we found out a couple of days ago is not going to be included in the legislation. And so you think, well, that was 6 months of work that someday we'll use, I hope. But I think all of us in the transportation field know that you have to have a real commitment to the end, to the mission and the end of what you're working for, which, as Carly said, is a transportation system that gets people to where they work, live, and play, that brings people to opportunities, that really brings about a better quality of life, which is why I'm passionate about it. The last thing I would say is, and this is advice to anybody who wants to go into any career, ask for help and give help when you're asked for it. So I just,
Why do you say?
Why do I say that? Well,
Yeah,
when our son was growing up, I would say to him often, nobody was born knowing how to do this. And by that, I mean, maybe other women on this panel do, but I certainly didn't come into the world knowing how to do the things I know how to do now. And I tried and failed and tried and did okay. But I learned pretty quickly that if I asked people who were more experienced than me for help, not just advice, but to say, I don't really know how to do that. If you're willing to enter that space and say, I'm not quite sure what I'm doing here, almost every time the person that you say that to will respond and say, been right there, let me help you. And then in turn, you get to turn and pay that favor back to those who are then learning. And I So I would, yeah, that's my advice. Nobody was born knowing how to do this. We all failed miserably, probably many times. I'll speak for myself. And you're just not seeing that because I got asked to be on a panel, right? But it's all right here behind me. So
Well, we'll get to that in a minute. I think we're going to have time, so we'll get to that. An extension of that advice is volunteer to be the one that does something. I think your boss is always going to appreciate if you're out there and the boss says something has to be done and everyone's kind of scratching their head and not sure how to do it. I always recommend volunteering it because people will appreciate you for taking the heat, and you're going to learn the same way everyone else did. Just be ready for the rough and tumble of it, and it really expands your horizons and makes you more capable for the next one, and everybody loves you for taking the heat on that project. So anyway, thank you. Really good answer. Thanks. Let's bring the whole panel back, and I'll go through each of you with this next question. And this has to do kind of from the project's perspective. And the question is what, let's see, how can a large infrastructure project set an example by applying gender equity to both process and outcomes? Kind of an awkward question, but kind of important for the community out there. Bringing gender equity, what is it we can do in these projects to bring it to the fore? And there's really, if we're just going to do the same job as all the men did in life, where's the gain? What is it that we bring? Because you guys have described, frankly, it takes a lot of courage. If we started with Heather's comment about, I didn't know this career existed when I was out there. People had to find the courage to stumble into something, right? They weren't born and raised. I guess Shilpa's the only one that was raised to be an engineer. So what kind of thoughts have you got? Mara, give us some great instincts here. Some great thoughts.
Okay, I'll start and then everyone can add. I guess I'm in thinking about the IBR program. I think the people at this table here are kind of responsible for the process part, right? Like we are at the table. We have the privilege to be there in the design and the planning the community meetings, right? And I just feel that we have a responsibility to kind of raise our voice regarding the perspective of the less dominant culture, women, people of color, making sure that not only are we asking for input in all of the meetings, but that we're representing it in the design as well. And that can be hard and it can be scary, and it doesn't always show up in the design standards, for example. But let's talk about safety, and let's talk about how users are going to be interacting with these facilities, right? So I think that's process and outcome with that awkward question. So I'm gonna
Good. Well, I think it's an important one to ask, and I'm glad you mentioned people of color as well, because it's not just about women. We share the burden of not being the dominant society with people of color, and our project is really committed not just to climate, as you represent on our team, but to equity. And equity is for all people. It's accessibility. It's people of color. It's both sides of the river. It comes in a lot of different forms. Heather.
So I think the beauty of these big projects is that you can demonstrate by the makeup of the leadership of the program, and whether it's like high leadership or like other leadership levels in the program, that there are these insane opportunities for people to lead small and large components of the project. These programs have like so many aspects to them, and I feel like it's important to find those opportunities for the communities we're trying to represent in the program, like where we're trying to deliver this big project and we're trying to represent equity, but we need to show that in the makeup of the program. So I just think what's awesome about these projects is that there's just so many like small, you could be the climate officer, you can be the GR lead, you could be
GR is government relations.
Government relations.
Public affairs.
You could be the safety analyst, lead. There's just like so many opportunities. And I think there's an obligation in these projects to make sure that those positions are filled with the community that we're trying to represent and build the projects for.
Excellent. Shilpa.
Thanks, Grace. I think we have an incredible opportunity just from a visibility standpoint of there's a lot of people noticing like how we're doing, whether it's the processes or the outcomes that we're trying to bring from this program. So that's, I guess, like good, but also that's an opportunity for like we don't have it figured out. It's something that we're learning, whether it's in this program or in the industry. Equity hasn't been something that has come like naturally. It was never even talked about until a few years ago. And that shows in all the projects that we've had, all the transportation infrastructure that we had. So I think it's important to not just share our experiences on like what we're doing, whether it's representation in leadership or staff or the efforts that we undertaking to reach out to the public, but also maybe some lessons learned about how we can do it. Because I've been to a few meetings where I guess they're more engineers and planners in that, but just the hunger of like, what can we do? How can we do? And sometimes it's like the ability to do it, where they are, whether it's a space or the budget. And I think with this program, we have that opportunity. We have the staff, we have great staff and great ideas. We have the opportunity, like I said, both sides of the river, the demographics, whether it's from an economic standpoint or ability standpoint. So I think, and that visibility, we have that visibility to be able to share that knowledge, but also I don't want anybody to feel that if it's not a big program, you can't do much from an equity standpoint. Every transportation project is in a community, and every community is different with different needs. And I think it's important to communicate with the community to see where the gaps are, where the gaps have been traditionally, and what has not been provided for the people. So I just want to also say that it is a possibility in a project, no matter the size.
So you've got to have the commitment and keep your eyes and ears open. And then you have people on the team that can bring those items forward, hear what the community is saying, and provide an avenue into the program to look at the diverse issues that are coming forward in the community. Is that
and be willing to try. We're not going to get it right the first time, but we have to try, because if you're not trying and doing something, you're not doing anything. And it's a topic that not everybody's comfortable talking yet, but it's okay to be uncomfortable, but it's important to try and learn from it.
So some people were around, maybe there's two of us on the panel that were around when the environment was something that was new, that was added to programs. There was quite a upheaval in the industry when it was, what do you mean we have to worry about the environment? I'm a civil engineer. This is what I know how to do. And the industry had to open itself up. And it was a reflection, the first people that raised these issues got creamed, but it was a reflection of the community, the broader nation kind of turning its attention there. And that's what's happened on equity. Climate as an extension of the environmental issues that are there. It has a bigger framework with climate right now. But I think I'm looking on the screen at the vessels that bring forward the values of the community into the program. And some people haven't grown as much from their college days on, how they were trained, and they need these vessels coming in to continue to bring insight from the community. And I'm looking at the people that do that. Carly.
So I think there's, and this is both in big projects and, in the region, like, I think the space that we all commit to helping folks understand how to communicate better with each other and how to make space and understand how valuable it is for folks to, I think Natalie was mentioning being called out, being asked to be a mentor and what that meant, and the idea of recognizing skill sets that are around you and helping folks see that in themselves. I wouldn't be in my position if somebody hadn't suggested that I could do this job, period. It never would have dawned on me to apply for this position. And so I think it's just to recognize.
Carly, so tell us the story. Someone came to you and said you should be doing this job. You didn't see it yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I would say back when I first started with the Southwest region, it was 2 regional administrators ago, and it was somebody who was so different than me that I could never have seen myself as a parallel to that person in any way, shape, or form. They're just a very kind of foreign individual. And then the one who followed him was somebody I knew well. He was involved in former project, but yeah, definitely. At some point, yeah, he said you could do this job, and I flat out thought he was crazy. But I mean, it is both harder and easier than you think. It's, about paying attention and such. And so that's possible and navigating challenging situations. But no, I flat out wouldn't have.
So I think it's important for the young woman listening, excuse me for interrupting, but it's important for the young woman listening to know that you guys just weren't born into the jobs you're in. You started as some people, high school internships and college internships and college and first job and over here and over there, and especially in transportation. Charlotte was trying to make that point earlier. Very few people grow up thinking I'm going to go into transportation. They know about teaching and policemen and fire and nurses and stuff like that. But most people don't know about transportation. Again, that's our fault. We'll get out there and teach them at some point. But I think if you are, it took someone telling you and saying, here, look in the mirror here, you could be doing this job. That, and then your self-esteem kind of comes in as you try and do parts of it, and you actually try on the boots and you can wear them, So.
Yeah, I also, I mean, I would note that at least from the perspective of doing different things, I mean, I came into transportation kind of later than a lot of my peers who have, I don't know, decades in, and had some work in social services and in education spaces and with houseless individuals for a short time. And so all of that stuff is really valuable now in what I do every day. I think the other thing with respect to kind of this slightly awkward question, both with like helping staff understand how to engage together and create space for folks, is just how legitimately we talk about the rich demographics of people that are in the area and what their different experiences may be and how they may be affected by a program like this, and actually giving that value and speaking to it like actively, openly, and as though, because it actually is, but as though it has meaning, that this project affects different people in different ways because of who they are. And I think the space of actually speaking about that plainly and openly is actually pretty powerful. I think it's easy to just think about, as just the travelers and whatever is happening, but the space of really understanding all the people and how they may be differently affected, and how I would say the demographics in this region are continue to be pushed around by way of housing values and other things. It's just so important to understand that and actually speak about that out in the open publicly to have it be a legitimate point of discussion.
I think our leadership, I'm not sucking up to him because he's here, but
let's see, Grace is frozen for me.
Yeah, she's
okay.
But Charlotte, you should answer the question, right?
Okay, I'll answer the question while Grace comes back. And actually, Carly, it kind of ties to what you were just saying. And so when I read the question, I will just say I also was like, well, that's kind of an awkwardly worded question. But I thought about it a lot. And here is an idea that I've not tried, but I think might be really helpful. I'll speak for myself that sometimes when we're in these processes for major, mega programs, and like Heather was saying, they're huge, right? They're really big programs. It's this, we start referring to the community, the public, our stakeholders, and we mean well, but they're these sort of nameless, faceless groups. And I wondered if a way to bring in gender equity into both the process and really not just gender equity, but all equity into the process and the outcomes is for those of us who are working, particularly those maybe in the earlier phases who are doing the more technical work, have to sort of bring a particular perspective or member of the community with them into the work, right? So when you're going through a design question, and Natalie, you're assigned to always be thinking about, I don't know, Susan, who is a single mother who lives in Northeast Portland and has to, commute. Like if you're bringing a very specific life experience perspective and it's different than your own, and you have to think about that and sort of answer the question of how would this impact Susan? And I that may be the craziest idea, and I'm, choosing to share it here on a webinar with a lot of people who, or I'm sure we're having a huge audience watching us tonight. I thought how it really just gets down to finding ways to bring those other voices in and other perspectives in just a consistent way. Because the other thing I will say about transportation is it's hard work. And I'll speak, we're tired, right? We put in a lot of hours. It's stressful at times. So that was the one idea. Grace, I'm sharing a crazy idea I had about how to bring in gender equity, all equity into the process and the outcome. The other thing I will say, because of what I do on programs like IBR, I thought about, of course, just the community engagement, how we get feedback about the process and the voices that we heard and how to improve that. And I will say that for those of us who have gone to a lot of public meetings on projects, there are almost always several retired engineers who come to speak at the public meeting. And because of it used to be mostly men, they're usually white men who are a little bit older, and they dominate the conversation because they have more technical expertise. So I think we've done a good job with community engagement just as a discipline, but I think IBR has particularly done a good job of finding ways to bring those quieter, softer voices that maybe don't have the right technical language or jargon to use, but have really good feedback, and using tools to sort of turn down the volume on the folks who really know the language and know how to speak it, and turn up the volumes on those who maybe stumble a bit more with the words or what it all means, but have very good insights into what it means for their particular community. And Grace, you're back just in time.
Well, I have a question I've been dying to ask you, but I want to ask if the audience has any questions that they've submitted, and we've got somebody that's going to give us those questions, or maybe I'm supposed to check my chat here. Question from the audience. Oh, darn. Okay, we'll take their question and not mine. Here we go. Controlling cost of a merge project, controlling cost for a mega project like the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program is a dynamic process. As we work to analyze cost escalation risks and opportunities, we remain committed to bringing this project in on time and on budget. This sounds like it's someone from the program, I think, but I could be wrong on that one. How is it we do stay on budget, given that it's a mega project and we have a great deal of risk management going on? And I know we've been through a recent process on risk management, but who's got a comment on that? Shilpa?
Sorry, so the question was, how do we stay on time and on budget?
Right. The replacement program is a dynamic process, it says. And as we look at the cost and cost escalation and risks, how do we make sure we're bringing it in on time and on budget? I think the broader community is thinking this project has gotten this big. How is it we know we're going to get there? Can you talk a little bit about what processes we've put in place to do that?
Right. So as you mentioned, we just recently finished a first round of the risk management, the cost estimation, validation process, where we got together, like talked about, we have a great team, so we got together and listed all the risks that we could think of from now through construction. And this is one way we're trying to manage this. So that way, we're trying to anticipate what risks might come up, what risks we have today, and then we're coming up with a plan to manage all those risks. Some are time, some are things that are within the program area, some might be outside the program area. So that's just one tool we're using to track them so we can address them, minimize them, and most of the time just relate to costs when it comes to construction. So that, I guess that's one example of how we're trying to do that.
Right. Any others? Carly?
I guess, yeah, I would say that it's big projects like this are horribly messy and nightmarish, and the idea of them being easy is just impossible. And to me, I think, you know, the best way to do this stuff is to have really a solid kind of strategic appraisal and a really strong strategic conversation going on at all times about where are we situationally now with all the stakeholders and all the parties, and figuring out how not to control that, because that's frankly impossible, but how to figure out how to actually like navigate the sort of technical side of things like Shilpa was talking about in the context that it's in. And that space of that context, and it's massive and deep. I remember when I went over to work on CRC from working in the region for a year.
That's
so
the old
previous,
project.
yeah,
It's
previous
the prior
version of
project
this.
for this one, same territory.
Yeah, it sat in the region for a year, and I was really overwhelmed by 7 counties and the space that was there, and trying to think about 7 counties worth of space, because that's what the region covers. And I was excited to go over to CRC because I could really wrap my hands around it, but it's so deep. It is so incredibly deep. And so the space of really having that, it's like you need a ship steadier for the work. And I think that's like Greg Johnson and the leadership team's role, but that sense of how that strategic conversation is coming together and guiding and informing that, using technical work, obviously, to support it. But this frankly is a political public process in a way that so many simpler projects are not. And that's much more the management activity to me than it is. I love the CVIP process. That is the technical process that Shilpa was talking through, but also really getting this done is about all the people and managing the context as best as possible.
For those listening, this is a very political process. There are 2 states, but there are 2 ports, 2 transit agencies, 2 planning organizations, 2 what am I missing? Cities. And so it really has a lot of complexity. So when she says deep, she's not talking about how deep we have to go into the river to put the bridge up. She's talking about the depth of issues and processes that we have to go through to keep everybody on. And that's half the job, is reminding one side of the river what the issues are on the other side of the river, and that one side doesn't just get to build the bridge. It's a 2-sided bridge. So anyone else, Heather or Natalie, do you have anything to add to that? All right, we have one more question that we'll take from the audience over here. And it really is, if you're in a meeting, it's more of a professional courtesy kind of thing. Or if you're in a meeting, there are quieter people, sometimes female voices, that are not heard in the meetings. And what can you do if you're in that situation to bring out those voices? Now, they may be in a technical meeting setting, or it may be a neighborhood meeting setting. It was, as someone described, the retired engineers come and they speak, but you need to make room for the other voices. How do you do that? What are some of the things you can do there? Charla, let's start with you. You do that for a living.
I do that for a living, but I will also say that I've experienced that as a woman, particularly, I'll say, as someone who is often the non-technical person, the non-engineer, the non-planner in any given conversation. So I think in terms of it, when it's happened to me, I will say that I think a great tactic has been, if you can't, it's hard to, I won't say, we'll just speak up, because that can be really challenging, but to have an ally in the meeting that might help create some space for you. If you can say to someone that you trust. I feel like I have some things to say and I just seem to get lost in the shuffle. And again, that sort of goes back to asking for help, because people usually will then help to bring you into the conversation. And really it's the same, I would say same advice, whether it's a professional meeting, a public meeting, bringing that same awareness with you to be watching for the people who are really engaged and seem to have something to say, but are not speaking up, and being very intentional about creating an avenue for them to speak. And sometimes, sometimes that's opening the floor of people, like just saying, would anyone like to speak? Or if it's someone that I know is a little less maybe able or comfortable to speak up in public, going to them to say, how can I help? Can I call on you? Is there a way that you could give feedback?
Mara, how about you? Those are good ideas. Thank you. Mara.
Sure. I would say during meetings, we have a bunch of different strategies that we've tried to use, right? To make sure that that you're including people who may be more shy or reluctant to speak up. I mean, sometimes for us as facilitators, in advance who those people might be who are already coming to your meeting, right? And then you make a plan. They either take turns having a conversation, or like Charlotte says, like have them have an ally or someone who can kind of draw in. You can break up into smaller groups. I think there's a lot of ways to try to make sure you're hearing voices. Sometimes more people are more comfortable with written word, right? So you can ask for feedback and input in different ways, right? Not everyone can think on the spot. I know it's hard for me, so these panels are sometimes a challenge, right? So you just some people need different ways to express themselves. So.
And again, it's not just women, it's maybe going around the room to anyone who's not spoken up. And someone may have an obstacle in making communication. So finding a space for them to provide input. And I like that you came up with other ideas. It's not just oral, and it could be that people just are shy and don't want to stand up and be identified. So finding other avenues for them. Yes, Mara.
Yeah, or even like going back to that first question, like what is a leader? Like not everyone perceives themselves as a leader, right? But that's everywhere and it's in every person, right? You just have to find a way to draw from people's great talents, and no matter where they're coming from.
Anyone else on this question?
Chris, I just wanted to share something that worked for me recently in similar situation very recently. Is I think it's what everybody said is finding allies in the room, but also like trying to be an ally. If you think somebody's like not being heard, maybe say so and so is trying to speak. And also like what Natalie mentioned like earlier is the young engineers, bringing them along to the meetings, and so making it okay for them to say it's normal to like speak up and share ideas and not think that it's not my place to do so. So I think those all have been helpful for me in my career, because my bosses and mentors when I came out of school did just that, to meet like the public working group meetings. But the experience recently was there was a situation, and like a person asking the question said, where I guess like I was trying to speak, but there's also other women trying to speak. It was a discussion, not being heard, and move forward. So at that point, I waited until I knew who my ally was, and when they spoke up, I ended up interrupting them, and they stopped and they listened. So that enabled everybody to listen. So I think it's very important. It's great, like find allies. And again, we're talking about women, but there's no rule that you need only women allies. Like everybody, all the men listening out there, you can be great allies too. I think it's really helpful if we look at it like being allies for each other. So that was something that helped, like not just like me speak up what I wanted to say, but also then I could say somebody else also is trying to speak up, because then I had the space to say something. So that might be something I'd be using more. But just want to share that because that just happened recently and that worked.
Good. Heather.
I don't have anything to add to I was basically going to say what Shilpa just said, but I did want to emphasize the importance of having allies, whether they be women or men, just having people that you can talk to ahead of time and just share your ideas, whether it's like in a meeting and afterwards you have these afterthoughts. Don't be afraid to have a conversation either through email or call them or whatever it is to say like, hey, I had these ideas and you didn't feel safe or you didn't feel the courage or whatever it is. It's okay that you didn't speak up in the meeting, but let's try to find a way to create that space next time, whether it's creating an opportunity for you to lead a certain part of a meeting next time or start off with some of those ideas that came up after that meeting and share those in the very beginning. I think finding that courage to have the people to talk to where you can share the things that you didn't feel that you could share in the meeting and being honest and vulnerable, saying, I didn't feel comfortable doing this and I would like to find an opportunity to do it. And I just think being vulnerable in that way is really helpful.
Okay, here's the question to all of you. And then we'll call it good. Risk. It's about risk and risk that you've taken in your career. Some of them may not have worked out, some of them may have, but to get where you are today, what's a risk you've taken? Heather, I'm going to start with you.
I tend to move. If I'm not feeling like I'm getting what I need from a position, I seek out something different so that I am getting what I need. And I'm not afraid to do that. And every time I do it, there's always a risk.
Why are you not afraid to do it? Were you afraid at one point in time? Why are you not afraid?
Yeah,
to do it? Because I think there are a lot of people that are afraid to take a risk like that. They're afraid they'll lose their job or they'll get a reputation for not being, a solid, they didn't stay long enough at a job or they're unfaithful or something.
Yeah, it's hard to describe what that is. I feel like I just have, maybe it was 8.5 years working on the original Columbia River Crossing project where there's lots of rocks being thrown at you and people talking about either you personally or the program. I grew pretty thick skin and I acknowledge that I have a really unique background in that way. But yeah, I mean, just being okay with, honestly, like some of the moves I've made, people have not been supportive of. There are people that are supportive and people that are not supportive, and just being okay with the fact that it's what's right for you and what feels right for you, and having the courage to do that, and just letting all of the things that are being said about you like just fall to the wayside. It's easier said than done, and don't get me wrong, like it hasn't been easy at times. I think I've taken some things pretty personally, and some of them may have been meant personally, some of them maybe not, but yeah, I mean, it takes a lot of courage, and I don't.
Why take the risk? Why take the heat? Why do you do it?
That's a tough question. Because I just know that I need a change. I need to do something different. Yeah. I mean, when I know
it feeds who you are is what you're telling us. Keeps you happy.
Yeah. It's what
you're looking for.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, what you won't find is you won't find me sitting, complaining about my job and like bringing other people down saying, I hate this and I hate that. And, trying to not be like in that place is, I think, better for everyone around you and yourself, and to just figure out what it is that you need to do next, small or big steps. And I will say, like, I have a big network of mentors and people I go to when I'm making these big decisions and like running my ideas and thought process by them to get their opinions. Is like having that network of people. The network is really important, of people you trust, and you trust their opinions, and they know you really well. They know how you think. And
I'm glad you mentioned network. I think it's important for people to have for their careers. All right, let's move on to Mara. Thank you, Heather. Thank you very much. You're on mute.
No, I know I'm not. I was still
Okay.
thinking because I thought maybe
Okay.
I wouldn't be second. So I would say that my perception of my risk taking is not very high, but when I think about it, it is, right? I listened to a friend, I don't know, 5-10 years ago, and they quoted some study about how, you know, men will apply for a job 4 years before they're ready to do it, and women will wait till they're overqualified. And since then, that's always kind of been in my head, right? Like we can stretch and grow and do more things than we think. So I feel like I take risks when I say yes to new challenges, and even if I don't feel 120% ready all the time to do it, because we're in this great community and you have a great network and you can ask for help and there are mentors. And I don't know, I just feel really lucky to be in a place where there's that community and net kind of around me. And I hope I'm providing that to other people too, right? Like we're in this together and we all just need to stretch and grow.
I think the program is very grateful to you for stepping up on the climate issue and leading us on climate.
Thanks.
Because climate and equity are really important to the program, and they're hard to get your hands on. We really appreciate it.
They're
Shilpa.
hard and it's new, right? So I guess that's a good example.
Yep.
Of that.
It's a good challenge. We're grateful though. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Shilpa.
Thanks, Grace. I think I try to look at it not as a risk, like try to put a different lens on it, thinking that if I don't make this change or if I don't do that, sure, it might be a risk, I might fail, but if I don't try it, I wouldn't know. I'll just be stuck in this like box that I have. And I'm not good with being comfortable. I like to like, do new things, learn new things. So that has always been something that has pushed me. And I think the first time I did take my other risk, it's kind of like what Heather said. I realized I was like starting complaining, and I didn't like the person I was. Like I didn't want to be the person who complained. If I feel that I was not happy, then I need to take a risk and do something different or change the way I'm doing things. That's the only way things were going to change for me. So I think it's putting a different perspective of it, like maybe takes that nervousness down a little. It's not a risk, it's a different way of doing things. It's an opportunity to do something different and learn something.
Good. Your answer is very, very close to Heather's. It's like there's happiness on the other side, or happiness comes from moving on, learning something new. So you're willing to take the risk because there's some happiness on the other side that feeds who you are.
Maybe there is, maybe there isn't, but I wouldn't know if I don't try it.
There you go. Good one. Carly, we got 3 to go and we've only got a few minutes. So
my risk was showing up to my first job interview with Washington State DOT when I had no idea what it meant. And it was all about transportation modeling, which is all about numbers. And I literally was not going to drive from Seattle to Vancouver that day to go to the job interview, because I re-looked at the application and the information, and I was like, I have no idea what this job is about. And my partner at the time was like, just go. And so I would say that was a risk, is just even going to that interview that just didn't really make sense. And I think what I learned is that they certainly could teach those skills. And I think the job environment right now is in a place where there's a lot of willingness to teach a lot of skills once you get there. And they're looking for folks who, in my case, they were looking for somebody who had some work experience under their belt, wasn't just coming out of grad school in Portland and looking for a place to land, but really had some real world experience, which I did have some working history coming in, and they were willing to teach me the rest of it. So it was really showing up for my first job interview for a planner 2 at WashDOT Southwest Region. Ooh.
Well, this is an example of, someone mentioned earlier, pivoting. You just pivoted into an area you didn't have all the qualifications for it, and you didn't even know what it was. So you took a risk to do it, and look at how successful you are today. We're glad you're there. Charla, and then Natalie.
Okay. I would say the biggest risk I took was I accepted a position that was of limited duration. So I left a full-time job to go to one that was only guaranteed for about 10 months, but it was the job I really wanted to do. and I didn't quite have the qualifications, which is why it was a limited duration job. They were kind of giving me a shot to make it. And so I always think if you're going to bet on yourself. And so I bet on myself, and it proved to be a fantastic career move for me.
That's a great lesson. Bet on yourself. Good job. Natalie.
Thanks, Grace. I would say that one of the biggest risks I feel like I've taken is setting boundaries. Setting boundaries with work. I think women are often forced to straddle this line between their careers and being the primary caregiver at home, and feel like they're failing at both, and that they can't take the time off that they need. So I asked my employer for extra time to care for my family and raise my children. I have dropped down to working part-time instead of working full-time, even though, my obligations at work are full-time. So I think that's, really important to, in any career, value yourself enough to advocate for your needs.
Excellent. We didn't spend much time talking about the life, family, work balance tonight. We could have. There's a lot of those good stories out there. We want to thank everyone who tuned in tonight. If you have any questions that you didn't get answered, you can email us at info. Let's see, it's info@interstatebridge.org. I would like to thank all of our panelists and Greg for being here tonight, but I'd also like to call out Salome Chimuku, Kyung Park, and Brent Hamill, who made this possible. They're the technological wizards, but they're also the people that put on our equity programs and try and reach out to the community, and so that the IBR can provide a reach that's bigger than just functional things about the bridge. The community is what drives us all to be here. I think you heard that from our panelists tonight. Thank you very much for being with us. Take care. Good evening.